You're the one who's guilty. I mean, come on, let's kick the ballistics here. Ain't no Uzis made in Harlem. I mean, owns a poppy field. This thing is bigger than Nino Brown. This is big business. This is the American way.
Greetings, my friend. Interested in the future, for that is where you and I are going to spend the rest of our lives. And remember, my friend, future events such as these will affect you in the future. You are interested in the unknown, the mysterious, the unexplainable. That is why you are here. And now, for the first time, we are bringing to you the full story of what happened on that fateful day. We are giving you all the evidence based only on the secret testimony of the miserable souls who survived this terrifying ordeal. The incidents, the places. My friend, we cannot keep this a secret any longer. Let us punish the guilty. Let us reward the innocent. My friend, can your heart stand the shocking facts about grave robbers from outer space?
A-D-N.
It's Headphones Neil!
What's up, guys? Headphones Neil here, back with my first ever Friday flashback episode review. So in this case, I'm going to be reviewing two films. One that was actually really good, and another one that's generally pretty bad, but I think holds up a little bit better since it was redone in color and generally restored as far as the picture quality goes. So I kind of want to review both of these relatively, or one's an old film and the other one's a really old film, so that's why I'm calling it a Friday flashback episode. So to start it off with the first review, I wanted to give my take on New Jack City, which released in 1991. So I'm watching the film for the first time, or I watched the film for the first time, and overall I want to say that it is a very good movie. It generally holds up. For the most part, a lot of the film, you don't really notice how it does, or you find that it generally holds up as a film because it doesn't rely a lot on technology. But you can see items that don't quite hold up as much. So some of the fashion trends, you're missing cell phones, the cars, and like the police station and things like that are kind of an era of the time. But you also don't feel like you're taken too far out of it, so they don't try to. And granted, it's not like a sci-fi movie, so they're not trying to predict anything. But they don't really do too much to make you pay attention to the technology in the film. So overall, when you're watching it, you don't really notice when the film is taking place. So it could have taken place in 1991 or 2001 or 1981, and potentially even 2020 or 2021. Aside from the idea that the cars kind of are a relic of the time, so for me, it was easy to gloss over a lot of that stuff. And when you look at characters like Nino Brown, played by Wesley Snipes, he doesn't, or you see the lack of cell phones. You have a lot of meetings taking place, but that kind of fits in with the persona you would expect for a drug dealer rising through the ranks in New York City. So he's not going to necessarily use a cell phone or landlines or things like that. So all in all, things like that generally work to the film's advantage. And then the acting of a few people that you know of. So for example, aside from Wesley Snipes, you have Ice-T in a much younger role. So that kind of stands out if you watch him progress in Law and Order. And then you have Chris Rock as Pookie. So that role there, so he actually is probably one of the few people who's generally aged the least. So playing the drug addict in the film, and looking at him now, not to say he's a drug addict now, but in general, his aging has generally been the least, because he mostly looks the same, especially when he's the most cleaned up and gotten off of his addiction in the film. It translates to the point where you can easily recognize him. And then as far as other characters, there's Mario Van Peebles, but I don't know many of his films off the top of my head, so it's hard for me to say what else I've seen him in. And then the rest of the cast is generally just people who kind of fit in with the roles, but overall everyone's portrayals were very well done. No one really stands out or outshines anyone else, and all their characters do a very good job. The easiest comparison to make as far as a more modern tale is, or would be, I want to say, American Gangster with Denzel Washington, so it's on par with the quality there. So aside from maybe the picture quality being not as high resolution as American Gangster, you would have thought that both films came out at the same time, especially since American Gangster takes place before New Jack City. So overall, I want to say that the film does a very good job to show the rise of Wesley Snipes' character as a drug lord, the control he gains and then he ultimately loses, and then how the cops played by Ice-T and then his partner use, for example, Pookie to their advantage to get a foothold in Wesley Snipes' organization and all of that. So things like that all fall into place, and all of the characters play well off of each other to make for a very good film. So I can see how the film in general has a very favorable and positive review, and why it holds up as a film that people go back and reference after all these years. So as far as the Rotten Tomatoes score, it has a critic score of 77% and an audience score of 80%. So for me, that's actually kind of low. I want to give it about a 90%, just because in general it was very well done. No one was super corny or cheesy. You see the growing progression of, for example, how Wesley Snipes' character and the guy who plays, or the character named G Money, and how they're really close, and then how they ultimately grow further apart. So things like that were very well done. How Pookie was rehabbed by Ice-T, and then because he doesn't really have anyone to continue keeping him off the drugs, he goes back to it and things like that, and the reactions he has there. So all in all, a very good film, and I'm glad I finally crossed that off my bucket list so I can understand references to that movie. So with that being said, I'm going to jump into another film that has more of a cult classic than a positive rating. So for example, on Rotten Tomatoes, it has a critic score of 68% and an audience score of 45%. So in general, Plan 9, if you watch just the original black and white transfer of the film, is not very good. The biggest thing you notice is, for example, the color shift as far as day and night is hard to tell when each time frame happens when. The acting is average. The plane is a very weak looking plane, so you have a steering column that bounces around as an effect to show that the UFO was doing a flyby and things like that. So in general, it's not a very well produced film as far as on a technical level for what they were trying to do. And then you have like the alien spaceship making a weird twanging noise, which I don't think I guess they were using whatever sound seemed futuristic at the time, but it doesn't really hold up after all this time. So when you're watching the colorized and restored version of the film, in general the color is a little bit better. It looks a lot more even. Day and night look a lot better and look more like when they're supposed to, and then even like sunset looks a little bit better. The effect of Inspector Clay, played by Tor Johnson, coming out of the grave is well done. Or looks a lot better and a lot more scary. So things like that make the colorized version a lot better. But in general, the acting kind of falls apart as the film continues to progress. So like the first half of the film is very well done, is set up nicely. You have the grave robber or the grave diggers getting the filling in the grave. You have the story about the old man and his wife, Vampira. You have the pilots in their very easy to spot fake plane, learning and seeing the UFO, which is not helped by the colorized and restored version. It still looks very fake, like the whole steering column bounces around, so this feels like a very cheaply made plane. And all of that, and I mean, if you avoid that in general, you can easily follow the film nicely, but then by the time you get to the second half of the film, it kind of starts to fall apart because, for example, when we're introduced to the aliens like Eros and the Commander and Tana, they start out nice when they're talking amongst themselves, but then like when you have Eros talking to the police inspector and the military guy, he sounds like a child having a fit, so that doesn't work very well. You have Tana having her outburst and all of that, and then like the metallic twangs, and then you have things like the special effect of when the UFO is in flames. It looks like they did a close-up of, like, I don't know, so they set maybe like a lighter packet on fire, so you have kind of like the candle look of a fire rather than a full-on flame of something, of a spaceship exploding. And then little things like when the spaceship is taking off and landing, it wobbles quite a bit, so it looks like you have someone trying to balance the spaceship to make it land, to create that special effect, which in general would have been cool looking if it was not wobbling around so much. So for me, as far as an overall rating for the film, I think the right around 50 to 60% is about right. So you see a good premise of aliens coming to Earth to confuse and stop the humans from creating the next level of atomic weapon in the Solaranite. But then they're using zombies to scare and confuse the humans, which doesn't really make sense as far as the Plan 9 portion of it. And then you have a language computer that's called the Dictolobitary or something like that. So that's weird. It's like, how does the language computer know what that is? So it's one of those. So as far as that goes, I mean, granted, as a sci-fi movie, at some point we've come across a way to create a language computer that can break down various elements just by analyzing the patterns, I guess, which I don't know that it makes sense, but again, fitting it in with a sci-fi theme, okay, sure, we finally figured it out based on these transmissions, or the aliens sent down plans or something like that, but it wasn't really well presented in the film, so they just left it as we finally figure out a way to break down any language into English. So one of those random things that was a cool idea but needed a little bit more time to have exposition on and hear more about those transmissions. So it would have been nice to maybe like add a few minutes to the film and have those alien transmissions throughout the film, maybe even in the first half as we transition into actually meeting the aliens. So for me, like I said, if I was to grade it myself, I would give it right around that 50 to 60%, but definitely lower if I'm watching just the black and white version. If I'm watching the colorized version, it's a little bit better just because day and night are more evenly done, and everything looks a little bit better as far as presentation. But in general, it's still an okay film, so it's one of those things where it seems like it's ripe for a remake to have it done better as far as the acting and presentation of like the Solaranite speech, the language computer. Maybe have like they do in like the King Kong films or like those apocalypse-like films where you have it set, in 1940 when the aliens are first trying to show up and they realize we have radio and they try to contact us, but because they can't, they move on and they keep trying their transmissions but move on, and then they move to present day and all the events in the graveyard and the UFOs not turning on, for example, their invisibility shield, or doing enough flybys to the point where they get noticed. So, as far as the other thing that I found particularly intriguing was the idea of refueling the ship at the space station. So, I actually liked that part still. It was kind of cheaply done to have that effect in space, but I thought in general that was presented well, so I kind of like that. But beyond that, there's very little to say anything positive about the film. So, like I said, if I'm to grade it 55 to 60%, maybe 70% at best, but there's enough in the film that leaves me wanting more as far as the presentation and the acting. So as far as a cult classic, it's okay and to watch for a sci-fi fan, but as far as in general film, as far as between the two films I've reviewed in this episode, if I was to recommend a film, I would definitely recommend watching New Jack City. Of the two films, granted they're both in different genres, but New Jack City is a better produced and presented film. So that is a film that, while it has a lot of mature themes in it, it is better presented and easier to watch and get through than Plan 9. Even after the minute-long introduction by the narrator that you heard at the top of this episode, you can definitely hear it as far as acting quality goes that Wesley Snipes' speech as far as why he's in the business he's in is better presented than the Plan 9 introduction. So that's kind of why I presented those two as the introductory clips, so that you can hear how the acting and the presentation contrast versus each other, and why I think New Jack City is definitely the better film of the two. So that's all there is for this particular review. So if you have any questions, comments, or anything like that, you can find me on Twitter at PatelN01. The website's headphonesdeal.review for reviews for past episodes, subscription links, supporting the show, and all of that good stuff. But that's all there is for this particular episode. Thanks for tuning in, and